Healing Church Hunters. Henrik was hit by a realization that mostly sparked annoyance. This emotion was partially directed towards himself, as he should have known better when first hearing about the circumstances of his recruitment. Arriving in the sandy chambers of the Loran labyrinth, no prospector was in sight, only hunters, which caused him to sigh loudly. This might be a little unprofessional. One of his female peers, who had apparently shared in his thoughts, said while inching closer to him. Indeed. Where is Archibald? Has he not arrived? They looked over at the party in the cubic chamber, with sand piling in the niches. 4 decadent pillars stood closer to the center to form an open square in between them. Within, they spotted the bald head with the graying long hair on the sides. He bumped her side, and they moved over. Professor Archibald was in the process of looking over a crude drawing of what almost passed as a map in his notebook. He was making additional scribblings on the pages and directly on the guiding drawing. Behind him, sitting on a chair up against one of the pillars, Henrik noticed a figure wrapped in a large brown mantle and hood, sitting with its feet up on a table. The figure looked as if it was sleeping. Mr. Archibald, Henrik asked, trying to make his annoyance apparent. The man instantly looked up at him, freezing with the pen still in the book. What is the plan, exactly? There are no prospectors here, the woman chimed in. We hunters are not experienced with navigating this place. She crossed her arms. Rather unintentionally, Henrik did the same. Archibald stared at them both in turn, returned to finish some quick, questionable adjustment, and closed the book. This place is already mapped. You need only to muscle your way to the destination. And deal with the aberration. A thing prospectors are just as proficient at. The old scholar looked annoyed. He had given little information aside from dealing with a beast in the Loran chalice. He had inquired independently with Ludwig, who had supplied him with hunters for the mission. Why ever prospectors suddenly were out of the picture remained a mystery to Henrik. Now the man seemed frustrated by the fact that he needed to tell them every bit of information, as the hunters were incapable of reading his mind. You see, I just need experienced personnel to subdue the beast. Subdue? The woman shouted. What do you mean subdue? Why would you want it alive, for God's sake? Instead of being intimidated by her outburst, he smiled wide and nodded, looking very pleased with himself. Her carcass proved dissatisfactory, and I have all the proper equipment outside, for proper research. Henrik turned to his new acquaintance, who shared deeply his astonishment and bother. I don't know where to start, Henrik said, putting his hand on his temple to relieve the annoyance. Why a Lauren beast, of all things? Don't concern yourself. Just wait a moment, and you will hear. Now leave me. Archibald had opened up a secondary notebook with equally disorienting drawings and scribblings. Henrik and the woman left the man as it seemed as an increasingly fruitless endeavor to speak on his level. Have you ever subdued a beast before? Henrik asked. The woman grinned under the pointed feather cap. It was angled downward to the degree her eyes were concealed as he looked slightly down at her. I did manage to tire one out so much it collapsed right in front of me. Really? She smirked fiendishly and looked up with one eye from under her cap. Yeah, really. He shook his head and smiled slightly back at her. They leaned back against the wall, having sight over the wild professor as he went to and fro in the chamber. I'm Henrik, by the by. Fiona. Charmed. Did you train under German? Oh, gods, no. Not the man himself, no. But I guess you can say I did train in his workshop. You did? I never recalled seeing you there. You must not have looked hard enough. She smiled, the same fickle smile at him. His cheeks became warm, and he was thankful for his face cover hiding his blushing. Then, he suddenly had a memory of seeing her once before. You were in Old Yarnum, perhaps? She nodded, then lost her smile. And the dream. Oh, that's where I remember you from. Not exactly the place where you make new acquaintances. No, not exactly. They fell silent. A silence which provoked Henrik to desperately want to find further topics in order to chase the oppressive quietude away. It's funny, though, that it is the tomb we would meet, where we never are, and not in the workshop, where we always are. She looked at him and laughed heartily. Perhaps the world placed us here for a reason, then. It must have grown tired of us ignoring one another. Exactly. Their attention was stolen away by the loud knocking on the table surface made by Archibald's fist. There were about 7 hunters in the chamber that all fell silent. He waited a moment, and the faint howl of a distant wind was the sole remnant of a sound filling the air before he spoke. Right. He burst into an explosive coughing fit before his presentation, which alone would have successfully attracted everyone's attention.
Good hunters. Now comes the time of enlightenment for you. Within this portion of Lorne lies a beast in wait. It has been encountered before, but due to some complications, no prospector could unfortunately be present for this. But do not fret or fear. The plan is made, and you just have to follow it.
He wandered over to a gateway with 2 blue lanterns held on each side by 2 female statues.
Straight on through, you will dart on over where her chamber lies. She is rather large, but the larger the better. Am I right?
The hunters murmured lowly, as he did a poor job in resonating with the crowd.
Right. The nifty part is that she is covered in the lightning bolts.
Had Henrik and any other hunter been able to picture such a monstrosity, they would surely have spoken up. But the sheer effort of imagining it rendered them silently puzzled. Personally, Henrik pictured it as a harmless trait. He knew the labyrinth was strange, and thought it just another anomaly.
The spark is what we are after. But I have yet to harness it. I will let my experienced companion take over from here. Listen to her well, I implore you.
The disheveled-looking figure now stood up and walked almost lumberingly, swaying as she casually and drowsily took the stage.
Yeah. We're going up against the real doozy. And the best part is, we can't kill it.
Her voice was very raspy, inhumanly so. It was so apparent that one could think she forced her voice to sound as it did.
We want this bugger alive, so, as it is up to us, its entire back will be covered in blue sparks. These will kill you. Every swipe of the thing will be a blasting of blue feistiness. But we will just have to soldier through. We will bring it down from its stilty legs. This will make the blue ruckus on its back stop, and our window will be open.
She rocked over to a heap of dark ropes. Or at least it looked to be. They were incredibly thick, and were partially lined with a silvery string. She heaved a part of it up in her hand to show it.
Conductors. Snare it as it lies, and when it attempts to re-spark itself, which it will, the lightning will be absorbed into these. We anticipate this will keep it weak enough to be unable to stand back up. The extra tricky part is wrapped in a question. Where do any of you suppose these sparks will take themselves?
It was a question well out of Henrik's jurisdiction. Lightning and conductors, together made sense in a way, but not in the terms of beast hunting.
No one? No. Well, it will go somewhere. I can tell you that much. So.
She dropped the wires and sauntered over to a large mechanism. It looked like a gas lamp, slightly taller than herself. It had a giant glass oval shape that held a large rod inside it. The rod itself was lined with small discs. The lamp shape sat atop a metal box of sort that had 4 similar rods on each side. She pointed to a hole in the box.
Here is where the end of this spider web goes. One end is attached to all of these ropes. 3 of you need to rapidly put this contraption up by slamming down these nails in the stone.
She pointed to a pile of round and pointed nails about the size of the average forearm.
When that is done, you will join the fray and bring it down. When it is down, each of these ends must be thrown over its body and similarly be hammered down in the ground. If all is done quickly, it will create enough resistance so it won't have the strength to rise again, especially since it is deprived of its prized sparks. Also remember, you cannot hold on to the wire itself, only the handles at the end.
She raised her hand, showing how she held onto a black handle jutting straight out from the wire's end.
With sparks running through, you should not be near it to begin with.
A contemptuous smile widened over her face underneath the baggy hood that obscured most of her face, save for the now grinning mouth.
And by the way, stay away from the contraption when the sparks are conducted.
With that, she wordlessly turned and walked clumsily back to her chair, as if the speech had tired her out something fierce. Henrik cast a worried glance at Fiona, who was already looking in his direction with a similar flabbergasted expression. A lower voice sounded out angrily somewhere next to them.
What even blood gods? Who captures a beast? Is it the church that has finally gone tits up, or just you?
While Henrik contained his amusement, Fiona erupted in a stifled chuckle, amongst others of the hunters who shared in the cheeky remark. Even the rustling woman smiled wickedly under her hood. Only Archibald was unamused.
Are you a heap of schoolchildren? Or are you hunters? The nerve! Master Ludwig and the provost assured me you bunch could see to the matter. As the state of the church, I cannot say. But you say what you will. This beast will be mine, and you will all see it done. For who else could? Bah! How can you stalk the depths of night and hunt folk and beast alike, but suddenly cower before something slightly out of the ordinary? I am appalled and disappointed.
Having accused them all of juvenile mentality, he did in fact appear rather immature himself after his outburst. Even if the accusation found itself ringing true, at least to Henrik. The woman stood up, now holding something looking like a giant two-fingered claw in her hand.
That's right, you babies. Since when do hunters think this much? Dealing with beasts is nothing new. This is how it will be dealt with. Now, follow me and please, shut your mouths while doing so.
Unlike Archibald, who had muttered angrily to himself during her speech, she was immune to their mockery and spoke almost teasingly, but relaxed to them. Holding her strange claw, she swiftly made way to the door guarded by the statues. The hunter's synchronicity set in, and all on impressive cue took their first step after her. Henrik agreed with the crude woman, for he recalled that in old Yarnam, thoughts could be lethal. And under the protection of a dream, each deadly lesson was deeply rooted within him due to the trauma. He had not even thought about surviving, at least not coherently. His body had moved and hunted, died and hunted again. All things were eliminated from his consciousness. To this day, he had not even thought much of it, even after being separated from the dream. For back then, he had not gotten the opportunity to do so. So why start now? One by one they entered through the gate into a much grander and well-lit chamber than the previous. Chandeliers swayed in the otherworldly breeze that visibly carried along sand as it traveled. By the end door stood 3 additional conductor contraptions, as well as a 4 feet heap of bundled metallic wires. The woman stopped outside the massive gate and turned to them. She watched as the equipment used in the demonstration was being hauled in by the last hunters, Professor Archibald being absent from the gathering. Ceremoniously, with a slight twitch, she brought her hand to her ear, which revealed her entire face as she tilted her head backwards. Under the hood were eyes open wide and filled with a passive frenzy. The irises seemed almost to shake suddenly from their intensity.
Listen. Hear it. The rattling of those bones.
She closed her eyes as pleasure overcame her sharp face. What she referred to sounded more like a form of scraping, the surface of boulders coming together to produce a low rasp, but not in any particular rhythm. Breaking the noise was occasionally the tone of a higher pitched sound of indistinct quality due to the obstacle between them and the source. It would at times accompany the scrapes, or otherwise be the solitary sound heard.
You know the drill.
She pointed out 2 of the largest men in the group.
You 2 follow directly behind me. The rest grab the equipment. As fast as you can. Get them in place, then be ready with the wires.
Hold on. A soft-spoken hunter who came with the last of the equipment spoke, sounding very nervous. What's the game here? Have you met this before? The woman seemed to brush away something from her lower lip before addressing him.
I have. And words cannot describe. Think of it not as battling a single target. You want to break the limbs. The more I say, the more you will be distracted. You are all hunters. Only the most ferocious can prevail among the feral.
She turned and alone shoved the door open with each hand on the two sides. Immediately the nature of their task was apparent. In a dim hall lit only by the warm candlelight, there were flashes of blue light, only otherwise seen in a stormy sky. At the end of the hall, as presented by the opening of the door, was a black mass of fur positioned along the wall. It was the source of the blue light, as literal bolts danced between the fur, lighting up the chamber as they did. Standing on bony hind legs, it reached up along the wall and scratched with skeletal paws at the ceiling, spanning a horrific 40 feet as it stood. The grinding sound the door produced caused a skull to turn their way, and the clawing against the stone to cease.
Go now!
The woman shouted and ran full sprint towards the fiend. It threw itself onto the ground into a quadrupedal stance, screaming out a shrieking tone with absent vocal cords, akin to the sound metal makes if grinded against metal. The woman in turn brandished the claw, and herself erupting in a piercing howl of her own, in a voice that did not fully appear as her common one, before bashing into the beast's face. It could have been the distance that obscured both perception and noise, but Henrik was certain he saw how her other hand now looked much bigger and bestial while thrashing towards the bony visage. Behind her came the two she had pointed out previously with admirable bravery, and both slammed down with their kirkhammers at the beast's frontal limbs. Henrik shoved one of the wires into Fiona's hands, who had been rendered petrified by the display, and gestured forward while holding the other half of the bundle. She nodded with determination, and they both ran in, followed by the rambled hollering of hunters, trying to organize the transport of the hefty contraptions. They immediately turned right and threw off the serpentine heap, quickly drawing their armaments. Rapidly after them came another duo who held the handles on opposite sides of the conductor machine. One threw off a bag he held over his shoulder, before they both turned back and shouted at them to begin positioning it as per the instructions. The words were barely distinguishable under the constant high-pitched howl of a gargantuan monstrosity whose attention was solely held by 3 brave hunters, one of which laughed and roared loudly enough she, too, was constantly heard in unison with the prey. Henrik threw himself down and crudely started to hammer in the thick metallic nails at the corner hole of the box with the blunt side of his cleaver, where the spring sat between the handle and blade. It went poorly, and he was eventually shoved away by a fellow that wordlessly drew forth the giant kirkhammer from his back, and in a fluent motion slammed ferociously down atop the spike, scraping against the metal box, but successfully impaling the nail in a single swing into the ground. The two men engaged with the beast appeared to suffer difficulty keeping pace with the large bony form, who was astonishingly nimble and moved fast for its size. With one swipe, Henrik saw how one of them managed to brace with the side of his hammer the impact of the electrifying claws and was sent tumbling backwards. Having been rendered superfluous in the work of mantling the mechanisms, he lunged forward into the fray, darting straight under the exposed and void ribcage amidst the black flowing fur. With his cleaver he slashed at the hind legs of the creature before continuing to rush out from under and behind it. It then threw itself to the side as it turned its empty gaze at him. As it did, one of the contraptions was knocked over, having not been fully fastened into the stone. The glass shattered as it did, but none paid it any mind, simply straightening it back upright once more. Henrik himself could not afford to lament its destruction, as the beast threw itself towards him with two devastating swipes that each sent waves of sparks sprawling out towards him. Having dodged the physical claws, he was not spared the sensation when his legs tensed up painfully from the instantaneous shock suffered from the sparks. He helplessly fell backwards, but managed to roll over immediately, landing on his knees. The woman came lunging like a beast from under the fiend, holding on to one of the wires and grabbed around its long neck, clutching herself into a persistent lock around it. The skeletal head threw itself from side to side in attempts to shake her off, in which time Henry came to his feet and ran along the right wall around towards the entrance. The system of wires had all been attached to the contraptions and further fastened into the ground. People were now in the process of arming themselves with a wire end, like the one the woman had just assaulted the beast with. Henrik only now saw how the singular thick wire they had been hauling, and later seen connected with the box, had been split into 4 thinner ends that people now brandished in anticipation for an opportunity. He made eye contact with Fiona, who held one of the wires. Once she saw him, she bumped the side of an adjacent hammer-wielding hunter and pointed for him to assault. With the hammer brandished, he leapt in simultaneously as Henrik, stepping and jumping between the manic throwing of the clawed, bestial feet. The woman threw herself around its neck, and in doing so tightening the wire she had managed to weave around it, now pulling it while shouting hysterically.
Fell the mark! Swipe it off!
Henrik leapt towards the same leg as the other hunter aimed for, while a third also arose to the task. With the beast's focus on the woman, they hammered at the bare bone until a loud crack echoed. A single swing with the hammer swept the feet out from under it, and it succumbed to the weight of its own body. The blue light instantly vanished, giving an entirely new atmosphere to the round hall. Fiona, amongst others, came running to snare it with loops, as well as jumping over its downstruck form. It regained movement surprisingly quickly, and uncharacteristically for its shape, crawled away with the speed of a reptile, hissing as one to boot. This caused all the wires atop it to limply slide off, in addition to throwing one hunter onto the stone floor. Only the ones wrapped around it withstood the maneuver.
Will they hold?
Fiona shouted while folding out her beast scythe. The strings tightened, but left little impression on the black fiend. Thankfully, the contraptions remained firmly upright.
Get him in the middle! Too few cannot hold him!
A hunter shouted, who had grabbed the wire around the neck and vainly pulled at it, Many mimicked his attempts and grabbed at the wires.
Now! The handles! Hold the...
The woman shouted as blue sparks once more began to gather at the skeletal limbs. In a roar it ignited the blinding bolts that caused the fur to stand up by the electrification. Some had enough wits and dexterity to release their hold as the blue bolts sparked along the wires. Those that were caught in the line seemed to explode in light, and either were thrown clear or fell downright where they stood like statues. Triumphantly it had reinvigorated itself with the blue light, whilst also causing two foolhardy hunters to be so overwhelmed by the sparks coursing through them that they now lay on the floor as a charred and smoking husk. Others who were touched by the lightning but were spared of its destructive power still lay on the stone, desperately utilizing the strength they had left to crawl themselves away from the horror. Henrik noticed how two of the contraptions had begun to light up with the blue sparks. Caught with its mobility restricted, the beast was left particularly exposed when the woman came running underneath it to tackle at its hind leg, grabbing at it and trying to push it out from under it. As the beast tried to move away, it stumbled forward, lowering its pelvis towards the ground in the clumsy movement. A Kirkhammer hunter was upon it and bashed right into its skull with a horizontal swing. Screeching from the impact, it shook its head and swiped blindly with its claws at the hunter, but was restricted by the wires. In its desperate attempts to ward off any frontal attacks, its wild swipes only served to worsen its balance, and once again it was sent plummeting to the floor, the light fading out. Henrik took a firm hold of the wire next to him and ran straight across, running over the skeletal body and managed to lock it into one of the machines. As it began to stand, the black wire tensed and he saw how the contraption lifted slightly in place, but the metallic latch that he had twisted in place held it firm, and so did the massive nails keeping the box to the floor, along with the spikes that had been nailed along the wires as well. It clawed and scraped along the floor since it was unable to stand itself upright, and while doing so, even more hunters managed to ensnare it with the wires. Faint blue light began to spark from its inner cavity, causing parts of the fur to electrify and stand up momentarily, but it was as if absorbed and vanished quickly. In one feeble attempt, it let out a pained shriek, and the light exploded from within in several blinding arcs that emerged over its back and along the wires. Henrik felt a sharp pain all over his right side and was enveloped with the light. As he fell, he saw he had been standing next to the broken apparatus, now spewing forth blue sparks from within the broken glass. Everyone quickly stepped away, but he had been rendered completely petrified of mind and body. He did not even feel the pain of impacting with the floor, yet all of his being suffered substantially by the blue sparks, slithering and piercing his entire body down to the bone. A silhouette blocked out the horrible light, and he was dragged away before his eyes closed, and all became silent. Back to consciousness, after what simply felt as him closing his eyes momentarily, a man sat kneeling beside him and locked eyes as soon as he opened them.
Henrik, speak to me.
Yeah.
You hear me all right?
He nodded. His arm felt a tension, like a perpetual vibrating numbness surging from within.
Feel this?
What?
Feel when I squeeze your arm?
Albeit faintly through the numbness, he did feel something tugging around his lower arm. He tried to look, but found the numbness prohibiting fluent movement.
I feel it.
Good. Might yet save you then.
He strained himself to look around where he saw the giant, dark beast, laying where it had been snared. While it emitted no sound, it moved its jaw up and down as if drawing breath. Before it sat a woman with her back turned to him, as if in a strange, ritualistic communion with the beast, sitting cross-legged and lurched forward with her face aimed straight at it. Beside her was a livid Archibald that, on the contrary to her demeanor, walked around and nonsensically made wide gestures while speaking to himself as he admired the beast. A bit to the side sat Fiona with a blanket over her and seemingly being seen to by a fellow hunter who provided her water. She sat tensed and quivering with her eyes closed, head downturned. When she opened them, they were instantly locked with his as she stood. It looked to demand heavy efforts on her part to perform this simple action, but he wagered it would demand even more of himself to do the same. She walked carefully, almost as if unaccustomed to it, but managed to make her way over to him, where she nearly collapsed by his side. He found her hand and her fingers entwined themselves with his. She shook it gently and smirked. No dreams for you, it seems. He wanted to say something, but found it easier to simply smile back at her. Couldn't leave me so quickly, eh? Not after we just met. God! Again? The hunter threw down the few cards in his hand and let the frustration quickly escape him before scratching his forehead more composedly. I can't do anything with this. Sorry, your luck is out tonight.
Well, on a calm night like this, we are all considered lucky.
Ludwig added with a light-hearted tone.
Come now, I want to try my hand,
he said, and waved away the sour hunter, who slouched over into an adjacent chair. As he was preparing his deck, he saw Henrik walk inside. He plainly saw how the man intended to make his stay short by the long steps he made towards the stairwell. But Ludwig was quick to call out to him, as he was known to disappear otherwise.
Henrik, will you play me? Delight in such a rare calm night.
Henrik looked his way, peering at him from under his hat and face cover. He gave a wave that could be interpreted as both goodbye and no thanks. Then he vanished out from the workshop. Gosh, what's with him? Never can't find anything good to say, that one. Do not condemn the man, Ludwig said sternly, still looking after him. He was in the midst of old Yarnum on that moonlit night. I know few who came back, but those that did have few words left. Henrik? Was he in old Yarnum? Whoa, I never knew. The group of 5 spied after him. Ludwig caught himself feeling a strange sense of pride in having humbled the two on Henrik's behalf. Well, that's how it is. He resumed his joyous mannerism and shuffled his deck. Who's to play me then? Just when one of them jumped into the opposite seat, another figure entered the workshop. Ludwig casually turned slightly to get a sense of who it could be, and was intrigued by the gallant and formal robes. The man had a white coat with a black vest under, grey striped pants, and was draped in a large, silvery holy shawl that fell behind him like a cape. He had blonde hair combed back, and the hints of a growing goatee. It made him look younger than he probably was, but it would make him very mature when the facial hair eventually grew into completion. Ludwig, is Master Ludwig here? He asked without directing his attention to anyone specific, seemingly in a hurry. Ludwig stood. Speaking. What can I help you with? The man sauntered up to him, extending his arm in greeting while still far away. Vicar Oscar, may I speak with you privately? Had he spoken more clearly and less quickly, his fellow hunter would surely have picked up on the presence of such a dignitary. One casually filled Ludwig's place, accustomed to various persons dragging their captain away on various errands. Certainly, Vicar. Come with me. He deliberately emphasized his title, but to no avail. The game had engrossed them as much as the hunt would. They walked up the stairs, where they found the office space to be vacant at the moment. It's a pleasure. Ludwig, captain of the church hunters. I was curious about the man succeeding the late Vicar Harald. My condolences. Oscar did not seem very bothered with formalities, and especially not with the mention of the vicar's sudden and dramatic departure. Thank you. It is a pleasure, Ludwig. He glanced up at the handle of his greatsword, emerging from his back. Busy night? Ludwig grabbed gently at the handle. No, luckily. But one can never lay their duty to rest. Your hunters down there? He nodded proudly. Part of the Holy Blades. From war veteran lineages all. Highly skilled. Oscar seemed satisfied with the amount of idle talk, and handed him a bundle of papers tied together with a string. Here's a list of names. Volunteers from the church's clerics. I wish to deploy them as hunters in order to more adequately research the nature of the scourge. He took the papers and examined them quickly. I want them trained as hunters. They know the nature of the beast very well. As do you. In your way. This skirt has claimed far too many lives for far too long. I won't have it.
I see. They are volunteers, you say? They wish to become hunters?
A program was established where it became apparent that there had been much too little field work. You will surely have the opportunity to immerse yourself in the details of their specific work. But for now, let's say many of our methods must be implemented in action, so to speak. Ludwig flipped through the papers and found many notes, seemingly about brief instances of their research.
I understand. But have you acknowledged the risks? I have no doubt such learned men can become exemplary hunters. But I must strongly advise caution if they are to experiment in the field. What exactly is it that must be achieved out there that cannot be researched from the church?
Oscar seemed to lose part of his authoritarian face by the question. Ludwig had been a leader for the better part of his life, in different capacities. He knew a young and inexperienced leader when he saw one. It has to do with their behavior. The documentation regarding the development of symptoms is found lacking, and further observation and subsequent appropriate prevention is desperately needed. Rest assured, we are all of the understanding they must be eradicated, but methods can be developed in the process. They are aware of how hunters operate, and will surely be very capable under your guidance. Ludwig looked at him, then back at the papers.
I will of course make it my pleasure to train the esteemed clerics of the church. I think it is brilliant, the measures you take.
The young vicar relaxed a bit, like he was holding his breath to maintain his posture, and could finally breathe out. Good. I'm glad you see it that way.
Besides, we need everyone that can be spared. The hunt is not like it used to be.
He phrased it like it was common knowledge, but the vicar reacted with a slight surprised glimpse in his eyes. How so?
The beasts, sir. They are simply more plentiful nowadays. And since old Yarnum, larger cases have been encountered.
Oscar nodded understandingly. He had adopted a gravenness over his face. Had he not addressed himself as the vicar and bore the proper attire, he could easily be mistaken for a novice cleric. Yes, indeed. He drifted off into himself for a moment. I have the utmost faith in you, he said, still adrift in his thoughts and without meeting his eyes. You may reach out to these candidates as you see fit. The sooner we may rid ourselves of this sinister blood, the better. He departed unceremoniously. No blessing given or even a courteous goodbye. He simply turned and walked towards the door at the end of the room, vanishing through it into the upper cathedral ward. Ludwig glanced once more at the names. The other vicars he had the pleasure of meeting had not shared this one's demeanor. His initiative was admirable, but he was uncertain from where the motivation had sprung. He hoped that the old adage had not implemented too much fear into the man. Eileen stood on the slope and stared up into the leafless branches of the great tree. All around her were beautiful white flowers, reminiscent of a kind she knew back home. Perhaps it was some meaning to the parallel, that she ought to never forget home, despite having left it along with much else in the past. Perhaps it was some form of wicked supernatural punishment that she would never be able to forget wherever she may go. But sour as the past may be, she could not bring herself to forsake her duty. She lingered a moment longer where she stood, before walking towards the metal gate that led further into a garden with cobbled paths. She aimed her direction towards the small stone house that stood atop a raised masoned foundation. She quickly spotted the man who could only be Caddock. He sat on the ledge of the stone foundation that ran along the long side exterior of the building, smoking his pipe that further conjured memories of home. She approached and stood below him, letting her shoulder bag down on the ground. He was dressed only in black, an overcoat that she thought familiar to the area, but with arm guards and boots of a familiar styled leatherwork. Beside him lay a wrapped package. "Caddock?" she asked, and only then did he meet her eyes with his.
Eileen. A pleasure to meet in person, but it will only be briefly.
I gathered as much.
Safe journey?
Sure. My departure was only delayed. He nodded and started to put out his pipe.
Dreams are no different here. It is the hunters you will be cooperating with. A good bunch. I think you will like them.
You mentioned in the letter. Nothing like the conclave then?
No. It is lonesome work. Unlike the conclave, your duty won't exactly be well received.
I gathered. Slaying your own kin, as you put it. He nodded with a strange forced smirk. His left arm only then appeared strangely stiff, as it had remained slightly less mobile.
But I'm sure you're eager to get going. Anything that still seems veiled to you?
You mentioned that it's worse than anything you would know of. How so? I'm no fool. I'm well prepared for them. But what is it? Do you even know? He jumped down, now standing in front of her. He moved ungracefully and seemed much older than he looked. Yet the former glory was still there in how he leapt and placed his feet.
Oh, I know. But I cannot tell you, for you can only see it for yourself. No matter how much you think about it, that people hunt their kin. Kin that are drunk on blood. People that are forced to see their kin become monsters, as well as being forced to kill them off. Who would not become a monster in turn? And how could I ever describe it properly?
But is it so simple? Just a trick of the mind? You wrote of the symptoms. Is it not the blood that does it to them as well? He shook his head in such a manner Eileen felt just like a little girl. With warm eyes, he walked towards her, hand outstretched and reaching for her own. With his left arm stiffly kept at his side, he grabbed her right hand like he was to greet her, but he handed something over and let go once she held on to it.
I told you. One day you will understand. You don't see it directly. It will hit you, like a flash from the heavens above.
She looked into her hand, where she found a black circle, a floral badge with a hollow space in the center.
It must be done, lest they all become beasts.
He then pointed at the wrapped bundle, still lying where he once sat.
You're tired, so they'll recognize you. You want to talk with Ludwig, the captain of the hunters. It may not be pleasant, but he ought to know who you are at least.
He then pointed towards the building.
The old workshop, now locked and forgotten by most.
His arm slowly lowered, gaze remaining at it as he sighed, then looked back at her.
This work needs a proper hunter, and I am no longer one. Sooner or later, I hope you'll gain the celestial wings of the dream. Then, I might open the workshop for you.
She looked inquisitively at him, with a hint of sympathy. She opened her mouth, but realized there was no good question to ask. He likely knew that she knew it was not her business. At least, not yet. So instead she abruptly reached out her hand to shake his.
It's been a pleasure, Caddock. I'm honored to have met you.
He shook it and nodded. For a long time he looked away from her, seemingly in contemplation. When their hands released, he met her eyes.
One more thing. Clerics are becoming hunters. It is a heavy burden I have given unto you, but only one that can be shouldered by the strong. When those with blood on their mind become those that hunt, the hunt can only lead to one place. These are the ones that turn into the most horrible beasts. And they must be hunted in turn, lest we all become beasts.
Here it is. Ludwig gestured proudly with open arms towards the room they had entered. The Healing Church workshop. Why did you relocate? Eileen asked, sounding more disinterested and unimpressed than she meant to. Ludwig's own enthusiasm appeared, however, to prevent the registration of her unintentional tone.
It just felt proper. Not many remains of the older generation, and those that do did not mind a fresh start. Besides, there are plenty of changes within the craft itself.
Eileen walked up, crow feather cape flowing behind her, to a man sitting by a workbench. She examined his work. He paid no mind to her, to the degree it could be speculated he deliberately did so. With a mold that resembled a thimble or a plated tip he had on his thumb, he heated up silvery bullet rounds and imprinted them with a fingerprint mark. What's so different about the current work, might I ask? She turned back to Ludwig.
Well, not that I often put it like this, but seeing you are a rather intimate addition to our organization.
He lay a hand around her to usher her out of common earshot. They entered through a doorway that led out onto the walkway which surrounded the tower's exterior, aligned with each of the floors, supported with pillars. From there one had a good overlook of all Yharnam and distant landscape, which was only obstructed by the towering cathedral and upper cathedral ward lying adjacent to the tower.
The hunt has grown more ferocious. The tragedy of Old Yharnam was a sad chapter in our town's history, and left many with horrible memories. Many hunters even felt so crestfallen that they have left our order, some of which have departed entirely, off to somewhere unknown. Do you know of Old Yharnam?
I know enough.
Yes, good. It is a dreadful story that I do not fancy to recall. But some speculate that it spawned more ferocious beasts, larger ones that have since plagued our streets.
She looked at him from behind the beaked mask, internally wondering about the logic of such an occurrence.
But some can only speculate,
He continued.
I see only beasts that harm the innocent, and such stains on man's purity ought to be brought into the light.
He gestured towards the handle peeking out behind his shoulder. Just a small glimpse of the magnificent greatsword.
So we have too grown stronger. The might of the holy blades is enough to match any size of beast.
She nodded. Very good, Captain. But I believe these will do for me. She patted on the blades of mercy hanging by her side. It was not the first time Ludwig came upon a somber expression. He valued his church hunters dearly, and each time he was reminded of the nature of her duties, that face returned.
Quite. Shall we head upstairs?
They entered once more into the workshop, and began the ascent up the round stair, running along the inner tower wall.
Your predecessor, Kadok, was a good hunter. I say he went about this dreadful business with admirable compassion. Knew him to partake in many hunts, though few knew him for the role he possessed.
Unfortunately, you won't see me hunting with them like he did. They stopped at the landing of the stairs. He gave her a nod paired with a sympathetic expression she thought was a bit patronizing.
I understand that his predecessor went about it similarly. I can only add my personal experience, that a fruitful hunt is successful by knowing your prey.
I would agree. But at what point does the line begin to blur, good captain? When Ludwig narrowed his eyes very slightly and smiled emotionlessly, it was likely the first sign of irritation she thought to spot on him. But he quickly brushed it off.
An interesting concept. I'm curious. Were you mentored by Kadok? You both come from far away, around the hinterlands region.
We do. But he did not train me.
Oh, I was under the impression... so your experiences, if not Kadok, then who?
Not a who, Captain. I gather you are not familiar with the hunters of the north.
Can't say that I am.
We rarely hunt with bow and arrow, let alone the rifles. We hunt like we always have. Or at least I did. So, my teacher was my prey. My fellow hunters who came and went. We tracked our prey, ran for days over the land like snakes, flew through the trees like birds, and descended upon them with claw and fang. How it has always been.
That's impressive. Truly impressive. I can hardly imagine such a sport.
Life is different there. But I can see there's a vital role to fill here.
Out of respect for the old craft, I understand your reasoning. But how come you ended up in Yharnam?
I gather it would be complicated for a foreigner to believe. I know why I'm here, and we both know how important it is. With a smirk, he got a hint in his eyes that told of a silent understanding.
Strange things occur in Yharnam. Stranger under its surface. I wish to hear and judge for myself, if it is not a bother.
Once again it struck her how unintentionally brusque she had sounded. When she spoke of the things she knew to be true and normal, it usually came across as pure fantasy to others. She had quickly lost the interest to be understood, which now manifested in an off-putting tone she only was aggravated by when speaking with Ludwig. For he was that sort of captain that never brushed one off. He wanted to know, because it was his job to know. However strange his underlings' minds were, he had to know where they stood. She steeled herself. She was slightly caught by the sudden shift in him. He was so kind and warm, despite being greeted by a cold woman, assigned to hunt his hunters. This revelation struck her in the moment, and she blinked, probably giving a much more noticeable reaction than needed. Very well. She peeked over his shoulder. The workshop was not bustling, but some came and went, while a group of leisuring hunters sat around the table, playing a card game she did not recognize. She did, however, spot a doorway and motioned with a tilted head for them to relocate. Once again they departed to the outside, now on the walkway above the one they had previously conversed on.
My apologies. It would not have been the first time my way of life received skeptic scoffs. As I see it, one must be able to look beyond what they know to be true.
She initially judged his lack of response as reluctance. Out of them all, she had anticipated Ludwig to be the most pious, but he only nodded in quiet agreement.
In the hinterlands, everyone anticipates a pilgrimage that is heralded by our dreams. Everyone normally has them when they are younger or half grown.
Normal dreams? She chuckled faintly.
I would call no dreams normal. Sometimes they are there for you to understand. Most of the time it's harder. So we try to make sense of what they tell us. Whether we know it or not, they reveal our entire purpose.
A pilgrimage, you say? How is such a journey conducted?
It is always different. I cannot tell how it is supposed to look. Sooner or later you receive a dream that tells you more about life. Things you didn't know before.
Did you dream of Yarnum then? Is that why you came here?
Not just. I did not know it then. But my pilgrimage started well before I was aware of it. Then came the letters, of course, from Kadok, who appealed to us dreamers if our pilgrimage would lead us to him, like the first hunter of hunters did.
What did you dream? She was reluctant to say, as it felt rather intimate. But she was persuaded by his gentle demeanor and how his blue shining eyes stared back at her.
It might not be easy for you to understand. Its meaning, that is. I only knew what it meant once I got to read the letters of recruitment. That it was me the crow was calling.
In the dream, a dream I would start having frequently, I was hunting. It stood out because it felt just like being awake, and nothing strange happened. But there would always be a large crow flying past, and I would chase it, not knowing why I did so. It would fly higher and higher, and in time, I too began to fly. And while I soared in the sky, I could see little firelights below. People wandering as if lost. Now I know that they indeed were lost.
A pleasant dream, it seems to me.
She looked up at him and allowed a smile to pass across her lips, for he could never have seen it behind her mask. I am in more need soaring the skies here than back home, to become the one that brings about a sky burial. Do you know what that means, Ludwig? He made no gesture to confirm or deny, but his expression revealed the little he knew. It is the only way for the deprived and mad to find their way back to the sky, where the dream resides. The only way to find their way back to the gods is to be guided. No matter how you see it, it is a mercy. He stared at her with mixed emotion. She could not tell what he was thinking, but he had humored her, and though she was uncertain that he understood, he had tried.
Guided, you say?
He sprung up a smile.
I would absolutely want to hear more. Very intriguing. But how about we resume the tour, just for now?
She had been sucked into a state of mind that was new to her. Never had she met someone quite like him. Let's. They walked back inside the cozy workshop.
Well, as you can see, it goes without saying. Come here to gear up, craft your tools and tend to your weapons.
Perhaps the lesser the rest see of me, the better. Ludwig grinned, almost surprised at a foolish suggestion.
Nonsense. Camaraderie is the backbone of us hunters. You will surely hunt plenty of beasts with many a brave blade.
I hunt alone. You know why. His delight faded and left behind a sour reminder of her true purpose. Had he even understood the threat the hunters faced? Seeing how he preferred to see her as just another hunter. But what more could she say to convince him?
Be that as it may, I strongly suspect you will fight more beasts than men. The church hunters are a hearty bunch. Many of them clerics, well familiar with the effects of the blood.
She cast her eyes over at the card-playing merry troop of hunters and recalled what Kadok had said. That it's not blood that turns them, rather something inherent to the hunt. She thought to herself, of the church hunters that she saw, that they certainly matched the type that would overindulge. She did not try much to suppress a disdain for them. In her opinion, what would eventually make them realize their folly was her blade at their beastly throats. "I fancied talking with you, Eileen," Ludwig said, his grim and concerned expression now a more pleasant smile. "I look forward to hearing more about the hinterlands. But for now, duty calls." He bowed his head and walked off. As he left, Eileen dearly wished that, unlike the rest, he would realize before it was too late. That perhaps one day she would see him as she soared over the forest of her vision, being guided properly by his own light. Guidance. A Caril rune discovered by the old hunter Ludwig, along with a holy moonlight sword. When Ludwig closed his eyes, he saw darkness, or perhaps nothingness, and that is where he discovered the tiny beings of light. Ludwig was certain that these playful dancing sprites offered guidance and emptied Ludwig of his fears, at least in the midst of a hunt.